There he is. Hey, Paul.
Hey, mate. How are you doing, Joe? We're doing great, right?
We're doing great, Paul. I can't believe we're down to like almost the last hour. It's kind of sad.
Yeah, really. I mean, I think we've changed. I've had a bunch of calls and messages with key people in my network, and they think we've changed some landscape here.
I love it,
We're
Paul.
celebrating the front line of field science and all these great feedback. We've got a bit of work to do to look at all the analytics, but
We do.
we're close to opening that bottle of champagne, I think.
Oh,
We can raise a toast to all the hard work going on at the front line of field science. That's where it's really happening.
absolutely. So, Paul, I got Dan and Phil here. I'm letting them both in, and I would love you to introduce Dan when he gets in here, and then Dan can introduce Phil, and we'll roll from there. There he is, out in Scotland, some backyard biodiversity. We got Dan.
Hi, guys.
Hi, Dan.
Nice to see you.
Phil. Thanks, Joe.
All right.
Okay, well,
Phil has joined us too, but Paul, I'm going to let you take over for some intros.
okay, Dan, it's my great pleasure to introduce you. And everybody, this is Dan Klein, who's the genius behind the technical side of things for these 3 days. Dan, I really know Dan as a diver. We dived together in England, and one great day I had an idea that I would run a big debris dive, a big debris cleanup dive. And I thought, why not do one in Lake Windermere, which is where I live? And so I put this thing together. It quickly grew from the expected 25 or 30 divers to almost 300 divers. So it was close to being a disaster, even keeping up with the registrations and let alone managing that many divers. So I learned then, when you're really up against it, you call Dan. So this is a message to everybody in all 60 countries and the thousands of you listening.
Thank you, Paul.
When you're up against something, call Dan Klein. He's the man. And then we've had all kinds of other adventures and planning. And Royal Geographical Society, Cambridge, big diving expeditions. And there's something about...
I have to say, yeah, Paul, I've got to say it's a credit to you and Joe for what you've been doing for the last 3 days. Absolute credit.
Well, we've got you in, Dan. So thanks for coming on
been,
this last session too. We can reveal the behind the scenes.
Yeah, indeed. I have to say there's a method in the madness, because I think it's quite something in this day and age when we're running the tech for this 3 days from northwest Scotland, and there's a reason for me being outside, because the sea behind me, because I'm in Ardnamurchan in northwest Scotland, and the sea behind me is a marine protected area, and there's triple SI all over the place on the land. But of course, what Phil is interested in is the MPAs and the MPZs, and I want to make the point that behind me is a marine protected zone, and this is why Phil cares. This is why I care. It has a diversity of species, particularly in this part of Scotland, but elsewhere in the UK, that are super important, super important, and kind of it's Phil's life. And I think it's a credit to have Phil on the call today as well, because some of the great work he's doing, we're both interested in data and how you collect data on species and the world. And I think Phil, it's kind of over to you, my friend, and talk about what you've been doing. And if you've got a little presentation you'd like to put up there, please do feel free. I'm going to go on mute because I think the bird song might be getting in your way, but enjoy. And if you've got a screen to share with your presentation, crack on.
Thanks, Dan. Good to see you at the front line.
Yeah, more bird song, I'd say.
Yeah, I feel really good to meet you. I know a fair bit about your work, but it's very, very nice to meet you in these circumstances, and hopefully not too far soon I'll see you up there.
Thanks, Paul. And just echoing what Dan said, real credit to you guys as to what you've achieved so far. It's been incredible to dip in and out of the day, hearing some incredible talks, incredible diversity, and huge inspiration, I think. We should all take from that. And I just feel really honored to have the opportunity to come here and talk a little bit about some of what I do. So thank you. So my name's Phil Taylor, and I run a very small charity here in Scotland called the Open Seas Trust. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we do, and I'm going to show you a little trailer for some work that we're doing with some other organisations working in Scotland. and hopefully I'll have even a minor amount of inspirational, leave you all with a minor amount of inspiration compared to the other speakers today, but even that would be something, I think. So I'll share my screen for a start, and we will just get right into it. So as Dan said, I personally feel deeply connected to the sea. I think, like many of us on the call, Paul also feel really at home underwater, and it's something that really drives right into the core of me. I can tell you about every foot of this seagrass bed. This is on the west coast of Scotland, waters between Mull and Iona. Deep imprinting memories of being underwater in these places. You're underwater for a lung's breadth in this case when you're snorkeling, but it feels like an eternity at times, and the amount of life you see once you put a goggle on and your face under the water is really quite something. Open Seas is a very small charity, and we're working in Scotland as a sort of campaign organisation to try and improve the health of the sea. And the first thing to say about Scottish seas is they're massive. Huge. So you can see this is the full extent, or not even, I couldn't even fit the northerly extent in, of Scotland's waters. You can see if you were to travel from Edinburgh all the way to London and travel that same distance out to the west, you would only just be hitting the boundary, and the same distance to the north, and you would yet to actually hit the extent of the waters, which we have a duty to protect here. And they're also beautiful. You know, these landscapes are known around the world. Beautiful seascapes filled with amazing species, basking shark, enigmatic species such as the puffin, these taking on St Kilda. Amazing places. This is the Bass Rock, the world's largest gannet colony. Sir David Attenborough called it the 8th natural wonder of the world. Incredible dynamic species. This is circular reefs. These are some of those very endemic species that Dan was talking about on his doorstep. You just look over Dan's right shoulder there, behind the island, there's a small sea loch called Loch Chukas, and in there, this photo and associated footage was taken, and these pipe worm clusters, reefs of worms underwater, aren't the normal kind of marine life that people associate with Scotland when they look at those dark grey seas on a November's day. And even the murky brown bits of sea, if you give them a chance to recover, if we remove some of the human pressures, if we take away those stresses that we persistently apply to our seas, can sustain incredible life. This is just a patch of what most people would consider sands and mud, sorry, in a part of the Clyde. But you can see if it's given a chance to allow life to regenerate in those places, it can really form something astounding. And it's in these coastal waters that I want to talk, really. It's in these coastal waters where Open Seas works, where you have the dynamic between predators here, a seal working in tandem, in combination, in chorus with the ecosystem beneath it, within the seaweeds, within the species that live around it. And it's in these waters where we've had sad and damaging declines, where we've caused sad and damaging declines. These are just 3 species of fish that are picked out. You can see that over the past 30 years, 40 years now, the stocks of these species are just flatlined. We talk about the Great Grand Banks collapse of cod, and sadly, we never really talk about the same effect having happened here on our own doorstep in the UK, and it is certainly the case that has happened. Historically, Scotland seas provided bountiful produce. You know, look at the number of boats here. This is from Wick Harbour, and each of those barrels filled with salted herring. Huge productive fisheries collecting fish. And if we look at similar harbours, this is not actually Scotland, but the fisheries are now these big industrial fisheries. These are 2 scallop dredges, Scottish scallop dredges, and you can see along the sides there rows upon rows of dredges big enough to wipe out most people's home within a couple of minutes if it was, if you're looking at the same kind of footprint. Fewer boats. Instead of catching fish in the water column where they swim, we're now scraping the seabed to try and collect up the last bits that remain. Truly, we are fishing down the food chain, and we're now, sadly, in a situation where we undermining the integrity of the ecosystem itself in pursuit of those last bits of seafood. And in those sepia photos and those sketches, such as the one of Wick, which I showed you, we actually managed to see in a slightly wiser way than we do today even. Back in those days, impacts such as scallop dredging, in fact, any kind of bottom-towed fishing was banned within coastal waters, within what was called the 3-mile limit. You can see a sort of buffer around our coast, and you can see if you look over on the west coast here, some of the sea lochs, which, as I said, are behind down the shoulder there. And these habitats are extremely sensitive to these activities. These are on the right, that's what a scallop dredge tows around with it. So if you can see, it's almost like a medieval torture device. And on the left, you know, this is a photo taken from inside Loch Carron. This is the largest flame shell bed in the world. You can see the red colors of the tentacles of these flame shells, and they actually build these nests together. They're a mollusk, but they build underwater habitats together. And you can see here the impact, the devastation that's caused when those two things meet. On the left, dead, dying animals. You can see even some scallops dead and dying within that. And on the right, just barren seabeds. And it's the role of organizations such as my own to try and draw public awareness to this issue. This is BBC Reporting Scotland, the main news channel here in Scotland, talking about these issues and trying to raise political awareness to actually force some kind of change. And together with others, we've been somewhat successful in doing that. This, as you can see in the map here, is the distribution of various different types of fishing in Scotland. The blue, the gradations of blue are the areas where white fishing takes place, so catching cod and haddock and species like that. The red areas are where trawling, bottom trawling takes place for scamping, mainly langoustine. And the purple areas are where the scallop dredges are going to fish. And you can see once you bring those three together, there's precious few areas left in between. And so as a movement, the environment movement in Scotland, the marine environment movement in Scotland, was successful in arguing that we should designate a network of marine protected areas, zones designed to protect the health of the sea, zones that were intended to conserve and where appropriate enhance the health of our marine ecosystems. But sadly, despite the fact that most of those were designated way back now 5-6 years ago, most without any protection whatsoever. The zones that are in red have no protection whatsoever. Only those with outlined in green have some. If I get my cursor, I can show you where Dan is. Dan, this is the sea loch Sunat, which Dan is on the shores of as we speak. It's part of both its own designation, but also a larger designation, which is called Loch Sunat to Sound of Jura, which is the only MPA designated in the world, or I believe in the world, for the critically endangered common skate. So it's not just that we're dealing, we're not dealing with super common species here. The misnomer, of course, common skate. There's a critically endangered species on the IUCN Red List. But sadly, even those green sites aren't protected entirely, and this is footage taken from within one of those zones where scallop dredging is banned, where damaging activity is banned, and you can quite clearly see the toe marks, the plow marks. This would look a home on a field being plowed, being harvested from a legal scallop dredging activity. And this is from the same site, just taken a couple of 100 meters away. You can see young gadoids, young cod-like species, also crab species in there. much healthier environment. It's the environment that, in fact, that should be within this site. This footage here is actually taken from a site that's been supposedly protected for hundreds of years, and you can see that that definitely has not happened. And again, it's the role of my organisation to try and shine a light on that. When we came into being in 2015-16, we knew that cases were being investigated and even taken to court, but in some cases, basically skippers being let off scot-free, being convicted but not given any kind of fine whatsoever. No disincentive for that activity to stop, and in fact, because they made money in the process, some could argue an incentive to continue it. And as Dan said, you know, with data nerds, amongst everything else, with journalists, with data nerds, with biologists, we're trying to mine as much information and as much detail as we can from anything that we can get our hands on as a very small organization with not a lot of cash. This is satellite data, and you can quite clearly see here a vessel heading into the protected area. This was used to corroborate some evidence that we had from someone who lived in the community on the coastline here, who reported someone fishing within this protected area, the hashed area, just a few minutes after the satellite passed. Of course, in Scotland, it's very rare for you to have clear skies, or it can be extremely rare for us to have clear skies, and so we have to use all sorts of different types of satellite data. This is Sentinel-1 data, which is a specific type of satellite radar, and you can see again the outlines of a vessel operating this entire screen here, being a protected area. And we, together with now what has become around 40 organizations, are simply saying this is enough is enough. We need to end illegality. We can do what we can from our small organizations, trying to scrape together what we can, but it's really government's responsibility to actually start to solve some of these issues. And in fact, if government actually regulated to resolve some of these issues, it could be done much more efficiently and much more effectively, and to the benefit of us all. You know, illegal fishing doesn't benefit anyone apart from perhaps one or two individuals at that very time. No one in the long run, certainly. And with these organizations, some of whom are shown here, Open Seas has formed Open Seas and these organizations have formed a much bigger coalition. I just want to show you a quick video from this big, broader coalition, talking about what we can do and talking about a desire for change, before stepping back to the presentation, because Dan asked that I talk. I suggest a few things that you guys could do at home yourselves in this regard, and I'll come back to those. If this loads.
So I hate to pop in for a second, but should there be sound?
What, sorry?
Should there be sound? Are we missing sound, or is it just a mix?
Yes, you are.
Why don't you stop the screen share and restart it, but make sure you click that little box at the bottom to optimize computer sound or share computer sound.
Okay, stop share. Screen share again, share computer scan. Okay, sorry about that, guys.
No, don't worry about it.
Feel good now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a breathtaking world, really.
It was once a hugely thriving ecosystem. We couldn't have cleaned it out anymore had we tried.
It's only in the last few decades that we've pushed the fisheries to the absolute limit.
It's kind of heartbreaking to think that my boys might live to see a time when the seas are barren or close to it.
The lack of fishing opportunity has left most fishing communities absolutely decimated.
My dad is a fisherman, and fishermen, no matter how they fish or where they fish, they're all going to be judged by history in the same light.
If we could get into the regeneration of the seabed, we could still have vibrant fisheries and therefore vibrant coastal communities. We've all got a stake in the sea. It belongs to all of us.
The resource which is closest to a community to some degree belongs to that community.
It's only by putting a limit back that we can see a recovery and a reinvigoration of what we once had.
So that's a campaign film. So that's a campaign film that, together with these other organisations, we've been a small part of putting together, and that we're hoping to be used to try and explain the problem a bit more clearly, to people who aren't like us, who aren't immediately engaged with the natural environment, who need that first introduction to the problem. And the hope is that together with those different organizations, as you saw there, including commercial divers, including commercial fishermen, people who live in the coastal communities, other businesses, other organizations, communities themselves, we can start to actually join a common voice and start to call for change. So just the last two things, sorry guys, I'll rattle through them now. Just the last two things that Dan had suggested I should pose a few things that you guys could do. The first is that these sort of 4 boxes of light here on the black screen are a vessel that was illegally fishing. This is a photo that came through to me at sort of 6 p.m. on a Saturday night, one January morning. And we managed to pursue to the point that we could say clearly that this was illegal fishing. And we managed to chase down enough evidence to actually put a case together. But we can't do this on our own. The Scottish coastline's massive. The world's coastline's even bigger. Illegal fishing is a problem around lots of places. If you're around the UK and you spot these kind of things, get in touch with us. If you're not around the UK and you spot things, get in touch with us and we'll pass it to someone else. There's a few of our details. The next thing you can do, of course, is eat more sustainable seafood. Seafood's great in terms of battling the climate change challenge that faces us. Seafood is one of the lowest carbon emission forms of protein you can get your hands on. It's also extremely healthy. So if we all want to live better lives in a better world, eat more seafood, but do it sustainably. Eat more sustainable seafood. And the key way I would recommend doing that is asking where it comes from. I showed this map earlier. This is the sort of aggregated way in which fishing is taking place around Scotland shores. And as I've shown you, I hope through the presentation, some of the places where these activities are happening are extremely unsuitable for that type of fishing. By taking those fishing gear there, we are undermining the future potential for our seas. Ask where the seafood comes from, and if you don't get a clear answer, there's probably a reason for it. So avoid that. But ask where it comes from and try and get some better clarity on your traceability. And then the last thing, of course, was to get in touch on the film that I showed. So the film is part of hopefully a bigger campaign, and hopefully we'll be showing that film in many places over the coming year. Get in touch with myself if you're interested in a showing through our website, and keep in touch on social media. That is me, and I thank you all for your attention and time.
Thank you, Phil. Much appreciated.
Great stuff, Phil. Thank you.
So, Phil, I have a question for you, Phil. So on this time slot last night, we had David Rothschild, who obviously picked up plastic, and he was trying to get awareness in the oceans going with plastic and plastiki. And of course, that's a very visible thing, plastic in the Pacific. And but I'm minded, because what we're talking about here and what you're talking about in particular is the stuff that's underneath. So is there a way very visibly in your mind that we could get people more engaged with what's going on underneath? Because obviously learning to scuba dive isn't so easy, potentially. You know, it's a bit of a schlep. But is there other ways we can get the population, everybody involved, and everybody seeing what's underneath the sea?
I think it's incumbent on us, isn't it? It's incumbent on us as organisations to actually do better at communicating that kind of stuff. That film is an attempt at doing that. You know, that's the idea. And if it wasn't for the COVID crisis, the idea would be there'd be a roadshow of that film going around, allowing people to come and see and talk and start a debate. That's the whole point. Start the debate. It's not to tell people what to do. It's not to tell anyone that we've got it all figured out, because none of us really do we? It's us to start the debate and to hopefully move away from a system which is frankly stacked against everyone at the moment. I would so entreat everyone to put a mask on and put their face in the water, though. I mean, you can go to the, you know, what seems like the deadest bit of sea from above the surface, and as soon as you put your face in the water, you find all sorts of amazing stuff. Go and dig around in rock pools. Go and swim in the water, get muddy, like the last speaker said. Go out and get muddy. I love that, and I think that you know, all of us who have a you know, deep-rooted sense of the environment and the world around us have got that because of those experiences. You know, I would love to sit here and tell you about, you know, the time, you know, some of the times when I've seen, you know, eagles up close, or dolphins only a couple of meters away, or, you know, had those experiences with massive pollock underwater. It's just mind-blowing. But really, everyone needs to hit those points themselves. Everyone needs to discover those ones themselves. And there's so many opportunities for that after lockdown is lifted. Stay safe.
Yeah, absolutely, Phil. And I'm really curious about, you know, citizen science is so important. People can play such a big role in so many things, observing so many things going on around our planet. We can gather so much data that way. And I think having people go out and photograph when they see these cases of illegal fishing can have a huge impact. I'm curious as to how it's been going. Are you finding it's starting to pick up some steam? You're starting to get more involvement and engagement, more images coming in?
Yeah, so I think what has changed is our ability to use the information. So once you're dealing with illegality, you start entering into a very complex world of evidence-based things, and it's not for us. We never feel that it is for us to determine whether someone has committed an offence or not. That is not for us. What is for us to do is to flag it, to create an evidence picture, and to pass it to the appropriate authorities. And that is why I say get in touch with us, not just straight get in touch with the authority. I mean, you should too as well if you see anything, and I can provide all that information, but it ain't quite as clear as just getting in touch with us. What we can do is we can help develop that story. And like I said, with the stuff like the satellite imagery, with other data sets, and with some of the investigative abilities from ourselves and from the people who are willing to work with us and come to us. And we can actually start to develop some of those stories. The footage I showed earlier from the site, which was supposedly protected for several hundred years, or a couple of hundred years, sorry, over 100 years. That footage was taken by a guy called George Brown, who's retired, right? He's retired, and he is just a really concerned ex-council worker who's concerned about the health of the sea. He learned about this illegality. He got his scuba gear on, and he jumped in, and he took that footage. You know, these are great people. Like, how cool is that? This guy's just not happy about someone else trying to profit from what is all of ours. And that in part happened because we were able to stitch some of that network together and help bring the information he was collecting with the information from the community there, and start to actually build that evidence picture that then meant something happened. We know that a fine was issued, but we know nothing else, right? This is part of the problem. Lack of transparency, including from the government. And that means that someone ate those scallops. Someone ate the scallops that came from that place, but we have no way of knowing it. And we have no way of telling that person that they did. And I can tell you with a very high degree of confidence that they would not want to have done that if they knew anything about where they came from. And that is a big part of what I see citizen science doing into the future, is actually starting to raise these red flags all over the place. At the top of the sort of supply chain, when stuff's getting caught and when people are entering protected areas, and at the bottom of the supply chain, when it's on someone's plate. If they're raising a red flag and say, where did this come from, by the way? And do you know about the damage that this could have caused to a marine protected area if it was from there? That forces the chef to ask, that forces the supply chain to ask, cascades right through the system, forces a systematic change. And hopefully, an organization like mine can be in amongst that to help catalyze some of that. But like I said, we don't know all the answers, and I don't pretend to be able to dictate any of that.
Can we just bring Paul back in for the final word here, because there's two parts to citizen science, isn't there? Really, there's the you know, I mean, Paul mentioned this yesterday. There's the citizen science in the sea search, you know, and divers creating 40 years worth of evidence, which allows governments to change policy, and that's kind of really cool. And then there's the other side, which Phil, you're very much part of, which is collecting data to go and make sure people don't do the right, you know, behave themselves and stop illegally fishing, and then we eat the right things. But Paul, can we have you as the last word, because you're Mr. Citizen Science basically, aren't you, here, and getting everybody out there and recording stuff and seeing stuff. So your thoughts, please.
Well, I'm certainly a big fan of it. And Phil, that was a terrific presentation. I found it very meaningful because as a diver and as someone who's working full time to help establish large-scale marine protected areas all over the world, I'm often disappointed when we get back to UK near shore waters and see they don't quite hold up. I mean, the UK government, we do well with our overseas, with our UK waters targets, particularly with the UK overseas territories. I've been a big part of that, you know, from Pitcairn Island to Ascension to Tristan da Cunha. And it's something that, you know, the UK government, as chaotic as things are at the moment, they can hold their heads up high with this, the Blue Belt campaign, as you well know. And I was part of the team that travelled around Britain, must be, holy smokes, 12 years ago, to help spread the word about establishing all the protected areas in nearshore British waters. And remember, what did we have, Phil? We had a plan of 127, or commitment for 127 of them. I don't know what the numbers are now, but they're down in the 20s or 30s, you know. And I'm very disappointed that the UK government haven't made a better example of the nearshore waters, because it feels like an easy win to me. If the UK government got behind you and your colleagues' sharp thinking, which is not only defended economically and ethically and practically and all the rest of it, but is demonstrated with the big overseas work that, you know, UK overseas territories, the UK government, right? What better way to transmit the values than really support the stuff that people can contact and touch very easily? So it's a problem, and I can't believe that the UK government aren't listening. So the best way, I think, to mobilise that is the government know we're voters. You know, we theoretically live in a democracy. We can vote with our feet. We can vote with values. So I'd say the way to do it is to somehow keep doing what you're doing, work out within your own sphere of influence, which you've done very well anyway, what you can do to get the message out. You're now broadcasting live to 60 countries and a hell of a lot of people. And let us take on that opportunity of listening to you as an acceptance of responsibility to help you do something about it. And that's the trick. You've now mobilized all of us. And I'm really on top of this because I think it's a crazy easy win. We're handing it on a plate to the authorities. You've done all the work, everybody gets it. And there's no better person to help push it around than people like me, because when I swim around a region where the scallops are jumping off the bottom and looking fantastic, and I'm putting them in my bag and having them on the beach, then I swim over here to where they're dredging, and it's a dead zone. It leaves me in tears. So you've done the right thing. Thank you, Dan, for making the introduction. And Phil, heard about open seas, never met you, but you've done exactly the right thing. And I reckon this is a bit of a step change in your campaign. I'm going to put everything I can do to help make it happen.
Thank you.